Hey, I'm Dylan, and this is the first episode of what I think is going to be called the LoLClash Review, where we take a look at the evolution of strategy in professional League of Legends and do a bit of analysis. And this episode, I'm going to be talking a bit about the 3v0 and 4v0 tower push meta and how it's sort of dying, and how with that death, it's really opening up what I think is some of the most strategically interesting play we've seen in quite a while in League of Legends. And I've got clips from the EULCS, the OGN finals, and the NALCS that sort of show how this strategy is developing and what we might see in the next few weeks. First clip here is just from Roccat versus Millennium in the first week of the LCS. And I think Millennium came into the EU Super Week looking very strategically prepared. Like, that's how I would explain it. They came in and the early games looked like they had done their homework. They understand where they should be pressing their advantages in the early game. And they had just had a really good performance. I think a lot of people were really surprised with how well Millennium did. And here we sort of see Millennium knows how to exploit this 3v0 and 4v0 split push. And this is why I think this is probably the best clip to start with. So, we see both junglers and top laners start on their sort of majority side of the map, which I think is still pretty strong. I still think we'll be seeing that because it allows you to dive the top laner if it shows up. It allows you safety in getting 2 jungle buffs at the start of the game. And you sort of see after they take the second buff, they sort of deviate from the usual, well, let's go into lane and push with 4 people that Roccat seems to want to do. And instead, they go and try and dive the mid lane. I think they understand here that Kassadin is a really weak mid laner, and they end up, like early in the game, and they end up baiting out a teleport from Ryze. And this is really important. In the past, this would be considered sort of bad because Roccat could just, push 2 towers and you gain a tower advantage. But teams have realized that this, especially in 4.8, isn't as big of a concern as it used to be. And you'll see that Millennium has a great response to this 3v0 now because of the teleport push from Roccat. They immediately back 3 members of their team, and you can get there in time to defend your second tower. This is what teams have sort of figured out. And the most important part of this isn't really the defending of the bottom tower. It's the ability of Cretan in the top lane here to deny like 2 or 3 waves in the top lane. And this really puts you at an experience advantage, and that's really, really important. Being at an experience advantage is debatedly more important than having a goal advantage in the early game. So Millennium has done their homework here. They show up with a good counter to the 3v0. This tower really isn't going to be going down, especially once Thresh shows up, they can hold it. So not only do they deny the experience in the top lane, now Jax can set up a freeze right here. He can freeze the lane, and Roccat is sort of in a tough spot. Well, they've just gotten behind. And you see Roccat in this game, they sort of have an okay idea of what to do. They think that maybe we can take a dragon or something, because that's why you put your dual lane in the bot lane, right? But because of this really cool early mid dive, they don't have teleport on Ryze anymore. So Jax, even though he's freezing in the bottom lane, he still has teleport. And because they rotated people into the bottom lane, it's not like they're at a disadvantage, or they're at a huge advantage here in the bottom lane. So Millennium goes and smartly contests the dragon, and as you're going to see, things really don't go that good for Roccat here. Millennium picks up first blood onto Kerp, onto Fizz. They end up stealing the dragon. They had just denied like 3 waves in the top lane, and Jax can run into the bottom lane and set up a freeze. So just off of like being really prepared early game and making some good rotations, Millennium really starts that game really far ahead, and they end up winning the game. I would argue almost single-handedly because of a really, really good early game strategy. So second clip's another one from the EULCS. It's pretty simple clip. It's just showing that SK decides to put their top laner on their minority side of the map. They sort of get pushed out by the Fnatic jungle top lane duo, and the jungle top lane duo, again, when you're running a really weak 2 ganks early mid laner like Kale, it becomes very easy to just run into the mid lane and pick up a kill because we no longer have to push these towers 3v0 and 4v0. And I know Jess has said in an interview after, he's like, well, I really shouldn't have taken Ignite. I never took Ignite in scrims. Why am I not taking Cleanse or Barrier or Heal or Ghost or anything else, I don't know. He might have lived there. He might have still died. But either way, like, it's a good amount of pressure you can put on in the early game, with some good, proper understanding of the current 2v1, 3v1, 4v1 meta. So EULCS was pretty cool. We saw some 3v0s. There were a few games that went like the Millennium one that I saw, where teams would try and 3v0, 4v0, and it sort of wouldn't work out as well as it used to, because some of the teams have done their homework and they have figured out how to counter the strategy. So then we had the OGN finals on Saturday. Although it was on a different patch, it was on 4.6, I believe. They really came in with some cool early game strategies as well, and they sort of took what we saw in those first two clips to the extreme. And they're not clearing their jungle with their jungler and diving mid to exploit weak mid laners. They're starting level 1, stealing a buff with like support Annie and diving mid. And it's just sort of, it's a little different than the first two clips, but it really just shows that teams are becoming a lot smarter at hard exploitation of weak early game laners. And you just see here like the double triple flash or something, just picks up a really, really almost free first blood onto LeBlanc. And that in itself, I think, is just a cool play. It's like, wow, well, they made a really good early game kind of cheese play, blew some flashes, picked up first blood. But what made this game sort of my favorite game of the entire OGN finals was how Naj and White Shield reacts to it, because they understand that by doing this, Samsung Blues laners are sort of in kind of awkward positions. It's not like you started on a majority side where you're strong there, and they're also behind. So what happens is they immediately run up 4 people to their top lane, and they initiate a really neat, sorry, let me skip this replay, a really neat 4v2 tower dive. And you see these people are still, like Lulu and Annie are still level 1 in lane, and they blow their teleport, show up, and pick up 2 well-executed tower dives, don't get me wrong, but these are pretty easy kills for players that good to pick up. And this is sort of why I love watching Korean games, and part of why Koreans are the best. They're the best at putting people into situations that it's really hard for people to outplay themselves out of. It's not like they're killing each other 1v1 in lane, 2v2 in lane all the time to gain their advantages. A lot of their advantages come from putting people in situations where they really can't do much. It's almost like unexploitable play. And I'd really advise, if you haven't watched the OGN finals, go back and watch them, and especially pay attention to this game number 2, because I think game number 2, even into the mid and late game, had some really cool strategic decision making, and I don't know, I found it really interesting. Lastly, we have the NALCS, where we surprisingly didn't see that much 3v0 and 4v0 split pushing, whereas like a month ago it would have been almost every single game. And one game that did see a lane swap and really kind of reminded me of the OGN finals was the last match, Cloud9 versus CLG. And I guess that's to be expected. Both teams have praised for their good rotations and sort of smart play, and this game really didn't disappoint. So sort of akin to what we saw in the game 2 of National White Shield versus Samsung Galaxy Blue, Cloud9 comes in with a pretty aggressive and exploitative sort of play in the early game, using the strength of Lee Sin in level 2. So they go for sort of like a, not cheesy, but like really aggressive play where they invade level 2 with Meteos. And because Dexter and Seraph have started their blue buff, they together they actually aren't level 2. Meteos is level 2, and they come in and pick up a first blood onto Seraph. And even if CLG have proper vision and they see it coming, which they didn't, it's really hard for them to deal with, because Lee Sin is a stronger character. And I think it's really important to note that when you're picking strong early game characters like Lee Sin, it's really strategically important to make use of that early game strength. Like, I think a lot of teams will pick Kha'Zix, they'll pick Lee Sin, they'll pick aggressive early laners, and they won't go for super aggressive invades and plays like teams like Cloud9 generally will. Like, Cloud9 really knows the power spikes of their champions, and they really abuse that well. But like, despite that, it really reminded me of, again, the game 2 of Naj and White Shield versus Blue, because CLG, despite getting pretty far behind from that level 1, they managed to find an opening in the top lane, because, again, like, C9's not always going to be able to defend from a tower dive for the entire game. So they rotate 4 people up, you see, in the top lane, and this almost looks like, again, the clip. It's a 4v2 tower dive. They only pick up 1 kill here instead of 2 kills, but they managed to kind of counterplay the focus on the bottom half of the map that C9's putting in and pick up a kill. CLG ends up making a really bad lane play in the top lane and pretty much set Seraph so far behind that it got really hard for him to come back that game. And I honestly think a lot of that has to do with the vision at level 1 and getting first blooded in the jungle as well. I'm really interested to see how CLG and C9 do in the future. I think watching their games, they looked a bit sloppy in a lot of their play, but strategically they looked pretty smart. Like, it really looked like they had a plan going into the game and they knew what they were doing. So going into week 2 of the LCS, I'm really looking forward to a lot of the really early aggression that you're seeing from Korea, because by now I think most of the LCS teams have done their homework and they realize that you can sort of do a lot of level 1, level 2, level 3 sort of cheese, not, I hate calling it cheese, but really focused aggression on the weak points of the enemy team. So I think that'll be pretty cool to see, and I'm going to be watching, and then if anything cool comes up in the next week, I'm probably going to make another video about it. So let me know if there's any specific topics you guys would want to see for another video, anything you'd like to see me talk about. I was thinking maybe about looking at jungle pathing in non-lane swap games and how a lot of Korean teams are really good at kill setups and sort of what kill setups mean. If that's a video you guys would like to see, let me know. Anyways, it'd be great if you could post comments in the YouTube or the Reddit thread. Thanks.